So, I am a full-time digital content creator in the food and beverage space. For me personally, OCD touches everything.
Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to say that. Yeah.
For me, that symmetry OCD really comes in when I'm frosting a cake, or I want all of my cupcakes to look perfectly uniform with the exact same swirl. I'm doing things also sometimes in even numbers, like OCD is exhausting. But it's really important for me to note that you can still be successful and have OCD, and it doesn't have to wreck your life. It doesn't have to steal your joy. It doesn't have to take away your passions. If anything, my passions and doing what I love is all the more reason to keep doing ERP and keep, chipping away at that OCD so I can keep doing what I love. My therapist and I actually discussed having a phrase to say to my OCD because OCD is a bully. I won't repeat it because it is just laden with swear words. For me personally, having a platform is a privilege. Speaking up on it and realizing very quickly that I was so far from alone made me feel really called to advocate for getting OCD treatment.
If you've liked the things that you've seen on the Get to Know OCD podcast and you want to know more about OCD, you can go to NOCD.com. We have tons of education. You can go to our NOCD YouTube channel and watch our webinars and other episodes of the podcast. And we hope that you will take advantage of everything that we have available to you. Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the Get to Know OCD podcast. Thrilled to have you here today. If you like the Get to Know OCD podcast and you want to subscribe, you can go to the NOCD YouTube channel and subscribe there. If you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions, feel free to go to NOCD.com. That's NOCD.com, where we have licensed therapists waiting to meet with you and do great work with you. Today, I'm excited that we have Allie Duncan back. Allie and I have had a chat already. Hi, Allie. Good to see you
Hi,
again.
good to see you too.
And now we're kind of formalizing it with more of our podcast work today. So thanks for joining, Allie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So sugar pusher, baking, all things sweet. Tell us all about it, what you do, and what that presence in the world is like for you.
So, I am a full-time digital content creator in the food and beverage space, mostly baking and now tiny baking. So, I make a lot of videos that are teeny tiny baked goods and drinks. And then I do a lot of like cake inspo, cake ideas, cupcake ideas, that sort of thing.
Awesome. And how about the gluten-free world? Could you make one for me?
I actually, I'm supposed to be gluten-free. I'm still not very good at it. So
Yeah.
yes, I do make some gluten-free stuff, not typically on my page, but in my real life at home, I'm very gluten limited these days. So
Wonderful.
yeah,
If I ever stop by, we'll share a gluten-free cookie. That sounds wonderful.
feel free.
Um, yeah, I like the tiny stuff. What inspired moving into that area there?
It was really just kind of accidental.
Mm-hmm.
This really awesome company sent me this tiny oven that's powered by little tea light candles.
Oh,
And they were like, just try it and see what you think. So I did. And as soon as I started posting videos in it, I noticed this huge spike in views, in interest. People were really, really into it. So now I have two custom tiny kitchens, one that is actually modeled after my real kitchen,
wow.
and it's just so fun, and it just, I think, brings people a little bit of joy and comfort, and that's just, I love that. It's so much fun for me.
Have you cloned a tiny you to work the tiny kitchen, or do you
I have
not yet?
not. No, I
No.
keep
Okay.
trying to get my cats to work the tiny kitchen, but they're both a
Yes.
little too big, so
Yeah.
it's just silly.
And that opposable thumb thing is still always the issue, you know.
Yeah, very difficult.
Well, you wouldn't be on this show if there wasn't some OCD thing involved too. So I always just want to jump into that and say, you know, OCD's been a part of your life. We've chatted a little bit about it, but for those who may not be familiar, can you give them a little bit of history?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 17. I was not medicated. It was not suggested that I have therapy. It was just sort of a, well, you've got this and, keep going. And I just sort of lived with it for my whole adult life until about a year and a half ago. I had seen a real increase in symptoms, and I had tried a bunch of different modalities of therapy, thinking it was my anxiety or depression or something else, before realizing, oh, this is actually my OCD. And it
Hmm.
is just acting in a way I've never seen it act before. And that was the point at which I finally got some help for it, which has been great.
Awesome. And I think that that tells a good story because some people worry, if I don't catch this in my teen years, I'm just screwed. It's going to be with me the rest of my life. There's no help that's going to be available. And you've been able to show that's not the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting for me personally. So having it when I was younger, like going through ERP with no CD, has actually helped me see where I thought it started in my teens. It started in childhood, and I've really been able to look at my life through this different lens of, oh, that was OCD, that's OCD, that's OCD, that's OCD, and it's been following me since honestly some of my earliest memories, and it kind of changes your perspective on things when you learn that.
What were some of your original things then, if you're comfortable talking about them?
Yeah.
But how did it kind of manifest originally?
I think it's so interesting because my mother has OCD, and I'm surprised did not recognize the signs a lot sooner, but I have this really vivid memory of being in kindergarten and refusing to use utensils in the school cafeteria, and I had to take my own utensils to school. I would not use the school utensils. I didn't want to open the bathroom door. I had this real problem with the bathroom door at school. Stuff like that, just things that seemed sort of, nothing at the time, that when you look back as you're in therapy, you're going, oh,
Hmm.
that was OCD. A lot of things around food, too, especially getting into like my early teen years, a lot of stuff around food, and a lot of, sort of superstitious things that I'm like, oh, that was OCD too. So just really interesting to see how many aspects of my life it's affected since I was a child.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a new product coming out next week called Block of Wood. You just carry it around with you, and when you need it, you take it out of your pocket, you knock on it 3 times, and nothing bad ever happens in your life. So it'll be wonderful, right? But
A lot of people are going to buy that.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's going to do really well. I'm really excited. But isn't that interesting, the whole superstitious piece of it and how OCD can really grow off of some of those and really start to believe them true? The step on a crack, break your mother's back kind of experience and those types of things.
Oh yeah, especially the knock on wood thing.
Hmm.
That's the most interesting one for sure.
Yeah, and if people can't find wood, they'll find a piece of plastic with a like fake wood grain painted on it. It's
Yeah,
close enough, right?
they'll take it.
And they could do that. Yeah. Now, OCD, of course, never touches baking because you love baking so much. So OCD would never interfere in any baking things, correct? Or am I totally wrong and off on something like that?
I mean, for me personally, OCD touches everything.
Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to say that. Yeah. Tell us more about that. Yeah.
So in baking, for me, it's a lot of symmetry. That's not
Yeah.
really my main theme, but for me, that symmetry OCD really comes in when I'm frosting a cake, especially, or I want all of my cupcakes to look perfectly uniform with the exact same swirl.
Hmm.
Um, sort of things like that, or even the really less symmetrical, but just, I don't even know what theme it is, where it's just like, oop, nope, 3 drops bad, 5 drops okay, of food coloring. When you're like putting it in the thing, you need 3 drops of this, no, you need five, like, oh no, like, it's just interesting doing things also sometimes in even numbers. Like, OCD is exhausting.
Sure.
So everybody who's listening to this podcast knows.
I heard a big kerfuffle online about the missing raspberry and the Great British Baking Show tart. Like people were like, "Where is the raspberry? There's supposed to be one more in there. It's not there." And people were going, just furious that this thing was not symmetrical. So absolutely, we can definitely see things like that. Uh, do you ever make a cake purposely wrong or frost it slightly off as a way to challenge things, or how do you make this all work with OCD?
I haven't made a cake purposely wrong, but I've definitely gotten to the point where I've been like, this is not perfectly symmetrical, right? Like
Got
my
it. Yeah.
edges are not perfectly straight or perfectly cut, like, and that's okay. Like
Cool.
there's 12 cupcakes and they don't all look exactly the same. This one looks a little different, or this one has a little more or less frosting. And instead of throwing it out or feeding it to my husband or refrosting it, I'm just like, okay, that's how it looks. I've really had to learn to accept the imperfections in things and not let them freak me out.
Awesome. That's great. And you went through this time then. I want to go back to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, where you've done therapy before, you've had talk therapy. We know that that can be very supportive for many things in life. It isn't always the best thing in the world of OCD, though. And I'm just curious, what's your journey through therapy been like?
So, switching to that, I've been in talk therapy for about 14 years with the same therapist, and she's really good, but OCD was never something I was really bringing up in talk therapy
Gotcha. That
because
makes sense.
for a long time, obviously, there's a lot of shame and stigma around it, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I often focused on other aspects of my life that were really troubling to me
Mm-hmm.
that maybe OCD had some component in, but I was too ashamed to talk about it. And what I noticed with ERP is that very immediately, like there was no shame, no stigma, no nothing, just like knowing that I had to put absolutely everything on the line out in the open if I wanted to get better, because I had gotten to a point where OCD was controlling nearly every aspect of my life and I didn't want to live that way anymore. I don't know so much that there was a light bulb moment. I personally really struggled when I started with ERP because it did make my anxiety a little bit higher at
Mm-hmm.
first.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you don't like sitting with discomfort, it's not the easiest thing in the world. But as I started doing more and more exposures outside of therapy, my brain sort of started rewiring itself in this way of like, doing exposures without being asked, without it being on my plan. Just like, okay, I'm going to do this and that's an exposure. I'm going to do that and that's an exposure. And every one that I did, eventually with time, I started noticing less anxiety, less and less and less and less, and noticing that I started to gain the ability when my brain was like, you need to do that compulsion. It was like, actually, I don't, but thanks. Oh, I hear you, but okay.
Yeah. What was it like to say to your brain, yeah, no, I'm not going to just finally, no.
Well, my therapist and I actually discussed having a phrase to say to my OCD because OCD is a bully. And so I came up with a phrase. I won't repeat it because it is just laden with swear words. Um,
Okay.
but
Mm-hmm.
that is the phrase that I use when I'm particularly just like, you know what? I've had enough of you today.
Mm-hmm.
Knock it off. Like, and it's hard to do. It feels kind of silly or unnatural at first, but once you start doing it, it helps you take your power back, I think.
Yeah. And that is the goal, isn't it? Living the life you want to live and not the life that OCD wants you to live. I'm thrilled you've had a great therapeutic relationships with your NOCD therapist and your previous therapist that you've been working with too. That's awesome. But I think it's also interesting your story because I've heard it before where you can have an amazing therapeutic relationship with someone, but still be embarrassed to talk about something like OCD. So again, you never have to disclose all your stuff, but uh, what was it like to take the risk to tell someone those things that were so maybe deep or embarrassing and let them out?
So part of my journey has really been talking about OCD on my social media platforms
Hmm.
and Instagram in particular. And what I was really surprised to find is that a lot more people are diagnosed with OCD than I would have ever imagined. I've had so many people, other creators, big creators, reach out
Hmm.
to me and say, well, actually, I have OCD as well, and ERP therapy is the only thing that helped me. And so that really gave me the courage to just be completely open in therapy, in ERP therapy with no CD, to just be open and to say, okay, some of these things, I wouldn't want to say to my regular therapist, my talk therapist, because I'm gonna feel like they're judging me. Fortunately, I don't really feel that way with my talk therapist. She's really good. And she makes me feel safe. But even as safe as she makes me feel, she does not have OCD and she doesn't have a lot of experience with it. So
Mhm.
some of those thoughts that are happening do feel really shameful or scary to tell somebody else. And I just didn't ever have that when I came to NOCD and I started ERP therapy. It just really felt like I could say anything that, was on my mind as far as OCD was concerned, and that there was room for that and no judgment and just a way forward and a way to help with those thoughts that I was having.
I often find it shocks people who start therapy when they say their thing finally and the therapist goes, okay.
Yeah.
And, and not, ah, just what are you talking about? Right. But I mean, to me, that's exactly what we train people for and why we do the work that we do, because we know OCD is going to go there, right?
Yeah.
That's just what it does. So there's, to me, there's just no shock or surprise. I'm always intrigued where OCD goes. I'm never ever overwhelmed by it or think, whoa, geez, that is just way too much, because OCD is always going to be way too much for the person who's experiencing it.
Yeah.
When you look back then and you go from kindergarten to where you are today, how has life changed? What's been some of the biggest differences that you've experienced?
I had a really unstable childhood.
Mm.
I moved a lot growing up. I went to a different school almost every year. I had a sort of tumultuous upbringing. And then when I was a teenager, my dad got really sick. And when I was about 15, he was given a year to live. Now, he lived till I was 29.
Oh wow.
Um, but I was his primary caretaker for a long time,
Sure.
in my teens and my early 20s. And that really had an effect on me, and it really impacted my OCD. And one of the things that's been most helpful for me in ERP therapy, through an OCD specifically, is the assessments that we do,
Hmm.
every 2 weeks, month, whatever. Um, those assessments that we do really helped start tracking where my OCD was going up and where it was going down. And for me as a woman, there was a very specific point in each month where
Hmm.
you could notably measure what my OCD was doing and how and why it was increasing. And that took so much power away from the OCD for me to be able to go, oh, okay, this is hormonal. And I
Yeah.
know that my hormones are going to be worse at this time. I have PMDD. So I know my hormones are going to be a lot worse at this time. And the more stressed I am, that's the other thing I've learned, the more stressed I am, the more OCD symptoms I'm going to be feeling and the harder I need to work to combat those. But just being able to go, oh, I recognize this time as being extremely stressful. Of course, my OCD is flaring up. Here's some exercises I can do. Like that,
Yeah.
that's been something that's really changed for me because after I got diagnosed, nobody told me what to do. Nobody offered me help. There was nothing. And that was in the early aughts. So like we weren't there where we are now, in
Hmm.
terms of talking about OCD as a society.
Right.
But even medically, it was very different back then. And it's just so interesting to see how much things have changed, how much the conversation has changed, how much more it's becoming acceptable to talk about it out loud and to share your story. Um, and to be able to get the help that I needed to pinpoint when it's worse and why it's worse and what things, make it worse, and being able to combat it that way.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the hormonal piece too, because that's really important to talk about. So PMD, the premenstrual dysphoria, definitely changes that we can see emotionally in individuals right around their time of their period, and not uncommon for OCD to get worse around that point monthly. And how did you kind of finally recognize that? And would the themes change around that week, or like things would shift a little bit, or what? that I think it's good for people to learn about this because I don't know that we talk about it enough.
Yeah, of course. So it's really interesting. I will literally wake up one day, just one day, I just wake up and the OCD, the intrusive thoughts are really loud. The intrusive thoughts in my brain are dialed up to 110. And I'm like, that's weird. I feel so uncomfortable. And then I start to feel the anxiety. And then I open up my tracker app and I'm like, oh, I'm
Ah,
7 to 8 days out from my period. And then we started doing the assessments through NOCD. And it became really clear. My therapist was like, what's happening at this
mhm.
time every month? And I was like, well, let me tell
Let
you.
me tell you. Yeah.
And it became really clear. The themes don't really change for me. It's
Okay.
just a worsening of my symptoms. And my intrusive thoughts, if anything, get a lot louder. And that was really scary for me at first. And then I realized, oh, I'm at an age, just to be really open with you, where I'm approaching perimenopause, right? So,
Mhm.
like, my mom went through menopause really early, and your hormones start to shift.
Sure.
And so it's normal that things will get worse, especially if you have OCD. If you notice a connection between those two, that's a really normal thing. And you're right, we don't talk about it enough, because at no point in my life would I ever have connected those two dots had it not been for tracking my cycle and doing the assessments through an OCD and going, ah, bingo, got it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, what a great discovery for you too, just to see, and the amount of confusion that it can take away from your life going, just why has this happened now and then like this, when maybe there is some order in the chaos that we're just not able to see in that experience. So, mhm. Have you, a fun question, have you ever done an OCD themed cake or cupcake?
Hi. No, I mean, I've done cakes for an OCD for social media.
Cool.
So I guess that's an OCD themed cake.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. I like it. Well,
I
it would
might
be, yeah, it might be interesting during OCD Awareness Week. You might decorate a cake based on a OCD subtype or something like that.
I'll get some people to send me their intrusive thoughts and then I'll put them on a cake. I'll put them on a burn away cake. I've been doing a lot of burn away cakes
Oh, tell me
recently.
about a burn away cake. What's that?
Oh, they're so fun. So you make a cake and then you put like an edible image on a frosting sheet on one layer, and
Okay.
then you kind of pipe a bunch of frosting on it and you put a wafer paper like edible image on the top, and then you burn away the top layer to
Ooh.
reveal what's underneath. So
Ah.
that could be a really fun cake to make. You've given me a great idea.
I love the symbol of that too, because so many people think they are their OCD, and when you get treatment and you can burn away the influence of it in your life, you can truly see the person behind, and they might even see themselves a little bit better too.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
I really had to separate
Mhm.
myself. That's been one of the biggest things for me, is separating myself from my OCD,
Sure.
and knowing that my OCD, I just refer to it as a goblin. So like that's a goblin and it's not me. And then there's me, and it's me and I live with this goblin and I just got to battle this goblin to keep getting myself back on track.
Yeah. Obviously, OCD doesn't just affect the person with OCD. You're married, and how is this for your partner as well? And what have the two of you kind of done in evolving, living together with OCD being in the home as well?
Fortunately for me, my partner really understands. My husband's very understanding of OCD, so that's been really helpful. And he's really been able to. So I have a lot of health OCD
Okay.
specifically. And that's, for me, really tied to trauma and grief and loss. And that is a theme that has been really challenging for me, as I have my own physical health issues as well. And my go to with OCD, and my health OCD specifically, is seeking reassurance. And my husband's had to be like, what are you going to tell yourself? Because this is your OCD. I can't give you reassurance. Like, what can you tell yourself? What can you do here? Like, and that's been so helpful, because sometimes you just need a reminder. My husband's really good about saying, yeah, that's your OCD. Don't listen to it. Tell it to go away.
Hmm.
Tell it to insert curse words here. Um, and
Hmm.
that's been good for me, because I think a lot of, like, I've had partners in the past that don't really understand it, that aren't sympathetic, that might mock you or make you feel bad about it or call you derogatory names. And that always just made it worse, obviously. So having a partner that understands, and understanding also that it's hard on my partner as well, that it has impacted my life, that's been the most difficult aspect of it, is for me in some ways feeling like I'm letting my partner down because my OCD does still affect my life in a way that, like, it's really difficult for me to travel. It's really difficult for me to try a new restaurant. I'm
Okay.
still in that place where I'm working through the really big mountains I've got to climb with my OCD. And I recognize that as being hard for him too, but being able to hold space for how it's making him feel without beating myself up over it has been really important. And thankfully, he's also been really supportive in return.
That's awesome. I think with a platform like yours, where you reach out to so many people, you've got the baking, you're infusing OCD stories into it. You talked also about in the early 2000s, no one understood this as well as we do today, access to treatment. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the challenges, either that you've seen or because so many people reach out to you. What are you hearing also of the challenge that people say about finding effective treatment throughout their lives? And of course, that's one of the reasons NOCD is around, to be able to provide effective therapy to people in a much easier way than has ever been provided before. But I'd be interested in your story a little bit about that, and also what you've heard from other people.
Yeah, of course. So for me personally, it was just a general lack of knowledge that a type of therapy even existed to specifically treat OCD.
Mhm.
And in addition to that, when I realized that it did exist and it was a thing, looking locally to find, because I'm in a place that's really not that great for mental health services, um, really not being able to find anybody that specialized in it. And through that Google searching, finding No CD, and from other people, I've heard kind of the same thing, just like a lack of care in their community, a
Sure.
lack of specialized care in their community. From some people, it's, wow, I didn't even know that this was a thing that existed. And for others, of course, it's really the issue of insurance, which is an issue that I have as many types of insurance as No CD accepts. I have a weird insurance that won't cover it, right? So I have to
Hmm.
pay out of pocket, which is fine for me because I consider that, a necessary investment in my health,
Sure.
the same as my health insurance. But for some people, they're not in a position where they can afford to pay out of pocket for it. So that seems to be one of the biggest. I mean, insurance coverage, especially, seems to be one of the biggest
Yeah.
barriers to getting the mental health care in any form, but especially in ERP therapy that I think a lot of people have.
I would agree. Prior to the pandemic, if you weren't in a large city, it was pretty tough to get exposure and response prevention therapy. You would have had to drive. I used to have people who would drive hours to get to see me live, because that was the only way we were doing the work then, too. And so I love that virtual ERP is amazingly effective, as good or better than in person. I always use a kitchen example. If you used to come to my office and you had a OCD issues around your stove, we had to pretend my desk was your stove, right? And we'd put red construction paper on the top, like that was the burner, and the knobs on the desk were the knobs on the stove. And now I could just say, go to your stove. Let's work on that together. So I love the virtual work. And yeah, access in terms of insurance is always an issue. We continue to work with more and more insurances all the time, but there's always little carve outs or various things too that we still try to negotiate with and come to an agreement with. So that's an ever evolving process, too. But I am thrilled that more and more people do have access to care today, which is great.
And I do want to touch on the virtual component of it because I
Sure.
feel like there's this sort of stigma around getting virtual mental health care, that it's not as good or it's not as effective. I've heard that from some people who haven't experienced it, but that's just their, oh, well, I just think it'll be this way. And
Sure.
it is every bit as effective as going to therapy in person has been for me, if not more, because when my anxiety is really bad, as I'm sure many other people with OCD and anxiety also experience, it is hard for me to leave my house. There are
Sure.
days where it is where my anxiety is so high that it isn't safe for me to get behind the wheel of my motor vehicle and drive. My therapist is like 25 minutes away each way. And sometimes that doesn't feel doable for me when my anxiety is particularly bad. So being able to have access in my home where I'm comfortable has been the most helpful thing for me with ERP because, as you know, it can be a really uncomfortable process. And that's the point of it. But being at home in my safe space really helps me make the treatment more effective for myself.
Yeah, and I will say this that uh, I love doing it virtually because I didn't really know what I was missing doing it only in person until I started to really do it all virtual, and then got to see the fact that this is really awesome, right? I mean, even like say hoarding, for example, it was an hour for me to drive to your house, an hour to do the session, an hour drive. It's a 3 hour charge for someone. And now I can say, turn the camera around and let's see the house. And I can do that in the span of an hour, right? So it can be more beneficial for people in that kind of sense. And it just, as you said too, there are people who just won't leave their house and then they're stuck because if they're only able to do it in person, what do you do in a situation like that? And now you can do this from the comfort of your own home, and then hopefully we make outside of your home comfortable too, right? That becomes the goal also. So I'm really glad that you find the virtual experience to be that good, because that's always been the goal of what we've done.
I think it's actually really critical. My talk therapist told me yesterday in session that there, one of the insurance providers has just stopped counting telehealth. They've just started denying all telehealth claims.
Hmm.
And that's really detrimental to people who have no other option than telehealth. So I just really appreciate that, that ability. I think it makes everybody's life a little bit easier. But I certainly have really enjoyed the experience of the virtual appointments.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest breakthroughs you've experienced in finally opening up and talking about OCD?
I think something I touched on earlier was in opening up about it, finding out that I was not alone, like
Hmm.
being really, I mean, really surprised by some of the people that were reaching out to me saying, I have it too. And, it was really debilitating for me for a long time. And just having other people share their stories with me sort of chips away because I feel like OCD out of all the mental illnesses that I have inherited from my family. I like the meme that says I didn't inherit generational wealth, I just inherited mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
That is me. Um, I feel like of all the aspects of mental illness that I deal with, that OCD has been the most lonely because it's the one that people seem to talk about the least, or at least did for a long time. So having other people share their stories with me really chipped away at the loneliness that I felt for so long, feeling like I was the only person that thought these thoughts or felt these things. And then to open up my world and realize so many other people have similar thoughts or similar themes or similar issues, or, just have OCD in general. It's made me feel a lot less alone. And it certainly made advocating, for getting treatment for OCD a lot easier for me because it's just completely erased the stigma for me. I can talk to people about it without fear of them judging me. Even if they do judge me, I don't care at this
Mm-hmm.
point. It's like I've become very matter of fact about my OCD, and that's been really, really helpful.
You didn't have to become an advocate. What pushed you into that direction?
I think for me personally, having a platform is a privilege. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that I have been afforded a number of privileges in life, although I struggled up until about 4 years ago, especially financially. I have built something for myself and I have built a space and a community where I am able to use my voice. And so for me, it feels almost irresponsible not to. I'm all for people with platforms speaking up on things or not speaking up on things. But again, speaking up on it and realizing very quickly that I was so far from alone made me feel really called to advocate for getting OCD treatment and talking about OCD more openly. Because if I can help one other person feel less alone in the journey, then that feels good to me. Whether that's selfish or not, I whatever, but it makes me feel good to think that maybe my story might help somebody else be able to get the treatment that they need to make their lives better or easier.
I've always thought that with therapy, I've always said if I could help one person, that's great. Everything else is icing and more icing and more icing on that cake. And appropriate to talk to you about that since, that is absolutely something that you do. Uh, where did the cake making come in for you? How did that even get started?
It's really random. I've lived a lot of lives in one lifetime so far. And I actually, when I was about 18, I either wanted to go to culinary school or I wanted to be a musician. There was never any other thing. From the time I was 4 years old, I really wanted to be a singer-songwriter. And I did everything I could my entire childhood. And the only other thing I ever loved in that way was baking. I had
Okay.
my first eat like many people. I had an easy bake oven when I was really young, and that was the thing that sort of sparked my interest. But my dad, when I went to go look at culinary schools, said, you know what? If music is what you want to do, I'll support you in that 1,000%. I want you to be happy. Like, he was really clear that he wanted me to have the happiness that he didn't feel he got to have in his life,
Yeah.
that he worked so hard for me to be able to have. And so he was really supportive. So I did the music journey. I had my music on MTV. I was a pretty successful independent singer songwriter. I didn't like the industry, the overall vibe of it. I went through a really public copyright lawsuit with a
Okay.
pop star,
Mm.
and I didn't like what came from that. I didn't like the press. I didn't like the negativity, and I'm very sensitive, so it just wasn't really the space for me. And so I sort of, when I left that industry, it was like, well, what else am I gonna do? Like, I don't know how to do anything else. And I was like, I know how to bake. I know how to make cakes.
Hmm.
And so I'm real scrappy. I became a fine dining pastry chef with literally no experience,
Nice.
hired on the spot by the owner of the restaurant. And then I realized pretty quickly I don't like working for other people in their kitchens and, started my own side business. And then when the pandemic hit, I had been working in an office as a paralegal and for about 5 years and, running my cake business on the side. And the pandemic hit. I have an autoimmune disorder. I had to be in the house. And I just started making videos. I just started putting baking videos on TikTok because a friend suggested it. And I didn't think anything would ever come of it, but it has. And I love it so much because I get to, like, still be creative, sort of in the same way that I was with music. But now instead of creating songs, I create videos, and I get to do that around food and drinks and stuff, which is so fun.
That's awesome. I love it. And how cool that you get to do something that you're passionate about, right? And you have the opportunity to do so and share it with other people, which is always great. And then to come on something like this and to talk about it too, which I appreciate because there's always a vulnerability in going in and talking about yourself to other people. So thank you for doing that and showing others that exactly what you've discovered, they're not alone in this
Yeah.
situation.
Well, not only are you not alone, but you can be successful. You can have OCD and still be successful. I feel like it's such an important thing to note because
Yeah.
there are absolutely days, at least in my OCD journey, where it feels like it's going to tear me down or it's going to prevent me from doing something. Like I said earlier, I'm really struggling to get on a plane right now. Like, I have not been able to step foot on an airplane in about in about a year and a half,
Hmm.
which, given that my husband is from another country and we typically travel a lot, is difficult. It's not
Hmm.
great for my life. We'll get there in ERP. That's
Hmm.
fine. Good things take time sometimes. But it's really important for me to note that you can still be successful and have OCD, and it doesn't have to wreck your life. It doesn't have to steal your joy. It doesn't have to take away your passions. If anything, like, it's my passions and doing what I love is all the more reason to keep doing ERP and keep, chipping away at that OCD so I can keep doing what I love.
That's awesome. And when OCD does flare up, right? And you have those moments, and you use your tirade of swear words, which I think are very fun. You have to follow through with then getting out of bed, right? And going and doing the thing. And sometimes people will say to me, and I'm going to bet you've felt this too, but people will say to me on like the webinars that I do and everything, but it feels so real, right? And why does it have to feel so real? And I always say to people, well, if it didn't feel real, I don't have a job, right? Because you would just be able to go, well, that's no big deal. How do you challenge those days when it might feel more real than other days and make sure that you don't let OCD win, right?
I'll be just completely honest with you. There are days where I do a compulsion. I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
still be in therapy if I didn't, right? There are days, obviously, especially like I said earlier around, my period, where
Mm-hmm.
there are days where some compulsions win out, right? But
Sure.
then I have to remind myself there's a lot of for me like either trying to delay it or I sort of like doing it and then messing it up as a way to like mess with it. But it's always just like for me, it's trying not to be too hard on myself if I do a compulsion and just be like, do better next time. Like, if it happens, it happens, do better next time. But I'm still in the stage for me in my journey where I'm pretty hyper vigilant about it, where I'm now very aware. Whereas before, I was not aware I was even doing probably half of my compulsions. I was not aware that half the things I was doing were compulsions. And now I'm
Mm-hmm.
aware that it's a compulsion.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is a, a win, big or small. It's a win that I can at least recognize, okay, well, I'm doing a compulsion. Like, but I always like to be really real about the fact that, like, as well as I feel I've been doing in ERP, that there are still days where it is challenging and there are still compulsions that I do. But overall, I just keep going to my therapy and doing my exposures and doing the best that I can.
And I love that you said that because I think there's a lot of people out there who do become shocked when they learn that this behavior they've been doing is a compulsion and they had no idea, especially on the mental side, right? Because I, we're used to seeing physical compulsions. We see them in movies and TV and people talk about them and they become the butt of jokes, unfortunately, and these types of things. But a lot of people don't realize that there's a mental side to compulsions as well. And was that also like eye-opening for you to see what all the mental things that you do as a way to compulse?
Yeah, I'll be really, really vulnerable here. So one of my compulsions, my brain will make me do something until something is safe, right? So it'll be like, okay, that's now you'll be safe. If you scoop this much cat food out to your cat at a time, that's safe. More or less not safe, something bad's gonna happen. If you don't touch this way, something bad's gonna happen. For me, I have a particular worry around a health incident that happened to me when I was younger, and my OCD would be like, if you don't get the second bag of frozen peas at the grocery store, if you touch the first one, that bad thing's going to happen to you again.
Sure.
And I've really had to learn to just cuss it out and be like, just shut up. Some days I will literally say out loud, girl, just shut up. Just shut up. Nobody wants to hear it. Like, just go away. Nobody wants it. And that was really surprising to me to realize, like, the number of times a day that I was having these mental compulsions where even if it didn't follow through on anything of like scooping the cat food, it was just like, oh, safe. Oh, I'm safe. Oh, I'm safe. Like, brains are so interesting.
Yeah. Well, they are. I've made a career out of them. I'm thrilled by them. They really are interesting. And, yeah, I love the fact that people feel safe to be vulnerable and can open up. And once they say something out loud again, and they get the response of, all right, tell me more about that, and they're not shamed or anything, it starts to I think, immediately take away some of the power of OCD, because OCD doesn't just use anxiety or distress, it's guilt and shame and disgust. So I bet it's pulled on every emotion for you at some point in its career in your brain as well.
1000%.
Yeah. Well, Allie, there are people out there who still are kind of debating, what should I do? Should I go to therapy? Should I do this? Should I don't know. And what do you want to say to them before we go?
Do it. Go to therapy. Go to NOCD. Get yourself a good, specially trained ERP therapist, and don't be afraid to do it. If you're able, if you've got the insurance, if you've got the money, make it work. Whatever you need to do to make it work, make it work. Because I can tell you, just looking, again, this has been the most helpful thing for me is the assessments that we do in ERP therapy through NOCD. Really being able to see the numbers is so eye-opening. Really being able to see graphs of where I started and where I'm at now, it's a night and day difference. I mean, I think I've had a 65% reduction in symptoms in the just about a year that I've been in treatment with NOCD. And that's not perfect. It's not 100%. But considering that I was severely limited in my daily life before, now I can eat. I've got like 6 restaurants I can eat at now. I'm adding more to the list. Someday I'll get on a plane again, but it's really life changing. And I just hope that anybody who listens to this that's on the fence knows that it's night and day, and that you don't have to be afraid or ashamed or scared, and that you can do it.
Awesome. Well, Allie, thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate it. Where can they find info about you and Sugar Pusher and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me at sugarpusher.net or at sugarpusher on most socials, especially Instagram and TikTok.
Fantastic. And if you like what we were going over today in the Get to Know OCD podcast, you can subscribe to the NOCD YouTube channel, and you can watch all of the episodes that we've filmed so far. If you're looking for help for OCD or related conditions like body-focused repetitive behaviors or tics or hoarding, we do work with that as well. Check out NOCD.com. That's NOCD.com. Thanks for watching today. We look forward to seeing you again in the future. Make it a good one.